name is Ty Faulkner Branum, and I'm here to talk about why education about the Shoah, which some of you might know more likely as the Holocaust, is important in our modern times and how we can do it. Along the way, I also want to touch on some Mennonite connections to the story of the Shoah, especially in light of the 2017 resolution on the topics of Israel, Palestine, and anti-Semitism. To start us off, I have a couple of quotes from the resolution that we prepared, and I would like to ask if there would be some volunteers in our audience that would like to read them aloud. Does anyone here like to read this, or? No? Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, I'll read it.
Sure.
Okay, excerpt from the 2017 MCUSA Seeking Peace in Israel and Palestine Resolution. Culminating a 3-year process, delegates at the Mennonite Church USA Assembly in Orlando on Thursday adopted a resolution titled Seeking Peace in Israel and Palestine, with approximately 98% voting in favor. The resolution addresses the injustices of military occupation as well as the suffering caused by anti-Semitism. The resolution notes that the suffering of Palestinians and Jews has too often been set against the other. We recognize, rather, that the legacy of Jewish suffering is intertwined with the suffering of Palestinians.
Thank you. Thank you. The next one, if someone would like to read that also.
The resolution also calls on Mennonites to examine the legacy of anti-Semitism in their own history and life. It commends plans for several conferences in the next biennium on topics including Mennonite involvement in the Holocaust and examining how the church views Scripture in light of the Holocaust. The resolution encourages Mennonites at different levels of church life to strengthen and build relationships with Jewish communities.
Good. So as you can see from here, the presentation we're playing today is going to be a baby step towards this work, but a step nonetheless. Now before we go any further here, I do want to define a couple of important terms that we will be using here. Some of you probably know these words, some of you might not, but we're going to get into them. The first term, as you can see on the screen here, is genocide. As is listed, it is the intentional destruction of a people in whole or in part. That is basically what it is. So we're just going to move on. The second term is the Holocaust. The term Holocaust refers to the killing of more than 6 million Jewish people across German-occupied Europe during the 1930s and 1940s. Many other people targeted for mass killings by the Nazis as well, including queer people, disabled people, Roma people, Jehovah's Witnesses, communists, as well as people labeled the Nazis as asocial, which basically meant anyone they wanted to. The third term is Shoah. Shoah is a Hebrew word that means catastrophe. Many Jewish people prefer the term Shoah to refer to the Holocaust. The reason being that the term Holocaust is a Greek word that refers to a burnt offering to a god. This term was used until the 1940s to refer to many past genocides, but after World War II, it came to be used exclusively for the genocide of the Jewish people by the Nazis. I don't think God wants humans to be sacrificed for any reason to him, so I do not like this term, and I would prefer to use it with the word Shoah. During this presentation, I might be switching between the words Holocaust and Shoah. Holocaust will probably be used in past tense. Thank you. The last term is anti-Semitism. At its simplest definition, anti-Semitism is hostility to, prejudice towards, or discrimination against Jews. I should also say a little bit about who the perpetrators of the Shoah were. The main force behind the Shoah were the Nazi government of Germany, but it was aided in this evil by several other forces, including the other nations allied with the Nazis, including Italy and Japan, but other Axis allies, including Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia as well, anti-Semitic people and countries occupied by the German forces who would actively support the Nazis in their attempts at capturing all Jewish people and sending them to concentration camps for forced labor and their eventual deaths. Besides those who actively supported the Nazis in implementing the Shoah were others who simply stood by and allowed this evil to happen. This included the majority of the population in occupied Europe, but also included nations like the United States, who refused admission to most Jewish people fleeing Europe during this era. Thankfully, there were also many who resisted what the Nazis were doing. There are many stories of both violent and nonviolent resistance against the Shoah, including especially those in Albania, the only country in Europe to gain a Jewish population during the war years, Denmark, and the Netherlands. In fact, in the Netherlands, we know of at least 40 Mennonites who helped save Jews from the Nazis. Their names are now listed in Israel as among the righteous of all nations. So with this background in place, I want to share a story that helps to explain why education of the Shoah is critically needed and why I wanted to make this presentation. About 2 months ago, I attended an event done by the OCCJ, for those who don't know, the Oklahoma Center for Community Justice, which involved me working with my fellow students to help grow change in our communities via social justice. Out of 50 or so kids in the program, only my friend who I was there with and myself were Jewish, so I had a different perspective from everybody else. We were tasked over our 3 days working together to create a presentation that we would show to a group of our choosing. It was in a small group, sitting around a table, spitballing ideas for presentations and trying to see what would stick or not. And the first thing that came to my mind when I was chosen was, I need to incorporate something Jewish into this, which then made me think about Holocaust education in America. But when I proposed this idea to my small group, there were a couple of people who didn't know what the Holocaust was. Hearing this confused me, as I thought everyone would know about the Holocaust, since in my opinion it was one of the worst events in human history. But I also knew these kids were sincere. They were telling the truth, and they were brave enough to ask this question, which confirmed to me that they really didn't know what it was. After that, we went back from our small groups to the main group to talk together about how oppression in society could lead to genocide. In that conversation, I again mentioned the story of the Holocaust as one of the many genocides in history. And again, the same thing happened. Many of the students didn't know about the Holocaust, and some of the kids didn't even know who Hitler was. The kids in the program with me were good kids, working to make their communities better and more just. And they were the same age as me too, around 16. I wasn't mad at them for being unaware of this history, but it did convince me that I needed to make Holocaust education the topic of my presentation. Now, I think there are 3 areas that we should be doing Shoah education towards. There are families, schools, and religious communities. Families are extraordinarily important when it comes to education because that is where kids first learn what is important and what their values are. I think many families avoid talking about hard things like the Shoah because it is awkward and hard to talk about, and because parents and guardians are often worried about if it's too horrible or dark for their children to be exposed to. I understand that. But I also worry that too many young people are growing up not knowing anything about it, and that they're not hearing from their adults about why it'd be something important to learn about for our history. My suggestions for families out there is that adults have this responsibility to first educate themselves on these issues, and then to start having age-appropriate conversations starting around elementary school age on this topic. It isn't easy, not at all, but there are good resources out there that can help that we are all going to share at the end of this presentation. You can see right there. The second area is in schools. No matter what kind of a school a student goes to, our time in education shapes who we are, and often is where we first encounter the concept of the broader world. There are many good social studies teachers out there who work hard to ensure that their students can learn about events like the Shoah. But teachers also face challenges that make this difficult, including often the lack of resources, as well as not having enough instructional time to cover everything that needs to be covered in the school year. And for some teachers, just like parents, they find the subject dark and awkward and avoid it, or their districts don't want to talk about it. As members of our community, we should, of course, do all we can to support teachers in this important work, and to encourage teachers that the education about the Shoah is important, and not to get political here, but supporting teachers should affect how we vote and how we engage with our political leaders. Mm-hmm. If we want to use our voices, we'll need to use them and influence others to make change happen. And by the way, there actually have been some positive moves in this front. Last year, the Oklahoma legislature passed a law that requires education about the Shoah to begin in 6th grade, and for the State Department of Education to work to develop more resources for educators on this topic. This tells me that our legislators do sometimes listen to the public and what we need to make our voices heard. And finally, there are churches and other religious communities. These communities have tremendous power because they are webs of social connection between everyone that participates. Religious communities could help to remedy this problem, but too often they just don't. Some religious communities avoid the problem altogether because of blatant anti-Semitism or homophobia, or because they are afraid of delving too deep into painful histories of our past. Mostly, though, I think from all 3 of the categories, ignorance is the biggest problem amongst them. The good news is that many religious communities are stepping up and doing a better job than they had in the past. In preparing for this presentation, I've learned a lot about what the Mennonite Church is doing to better understand their past, both the good and bad parts, and do better in the future. For anyone, for any group, this is hard work, and it takes time and it takes commitment. And I'm very proud of what you all are doing here. To close today, I did want to talk more about one more thing, and that is what kind of stories we are telling about. Professor author Shoah recently published an article in Humanistic Judaism magazine that argues that we need a major reset in the way that education about the Shoah is done. He argues that for too long, educators have focused solely on what he calls the horror story, with its almost incomprehensible body count and incalculable human tragedy, but have neglected to tell help stories, the stories of ordinary human beings who chose to take nonviolent acts of resistance against the Nazis and their agenda. I'd like to read a few excerpts from this article. To date, jury's 8-decade emphasis has understandably been placed primarily on the Holocaust as a horror story. So as your Chaim Genut will never forget having seen what no man should live, gas chambers built by engineers, children poisoned by educated physicians, infants killed by trained nurses, women and children shot and burned by high school and college graduates. Similarly, each of the 46 Holocaust museums around the globe I have visited detail the barbaric manufacture of atrocities, dehumanization, and murder. A visitor, who must be over 13, can see mounds of eyeglasses, human hair, shoes, suitcases, and Nazi taking photos of naked, unburied corpses and emaciated prisoners close to their bodies. Regrettably, horror story centrism leaves out much worth knowing and undermines confidence in human nature and humanity. Rabbi Harold M. Schwartz worries that it can unintentionally transmit a corrosive pessimism that has children remembering only the curse of the killers of the dream. The truth is far more complex. To be sure, in her 1997 memoir, Lita Baton Jackson, survivor of several years in Auschwitz-Birkenau, tells many horror stories of gas chambers, shootings, electric fences, torture, scorching sun, mental abuse, and the constant threat of death. However, Lydia also tells help stories of faith, hope, triumph, and love. They are stories of perseverance, loyalty, courage, in the face of the overwhelming odds, and of never giving up. Manya Friedman Perel, who survived 6 years and 8 camps, remembers, we resisted in every way we could. Our weapons were our bare hands, our minds, our courage, and our faith. I resisted by stealing bread and potatoes to share with my friends. I resisted by risking my life again and again. The Nazis could not crush our spirit, our faith, or our love for life and humanity. Holocaust nonviolent resistance, which has been called the help story, took many forms, e.g., behind barrack walls, high risk of life, Jewish prisoners secretly taught each other, new arrivals, Zavi boot camp aids for their survival, celebrated birthdays, provided prohibited classes for the children, observed the high holidays, arranged for covert abortions, etc. Out in the open, the old-timers propped up the weaker others, or even traded their jobs to boost the odds of survival. On death marches, some of the weak prisoners dared to try and hold up each other. As such, carers were guided by an ancient tenet, Kol Israel Abraham Ze Bazeh. We are all responsible for one another as a human being. There are many such stories that are waiting to be heard and retold. One of my favorites are the stories told by someone at Temple B'nai Israel on Oklahoma City, Michael Branum. Some of you know him from his work at the Respect Diversity Foundation, but I know him through his teaching of my Sunday school class during the last quarter. His parents were just teenagers in Europe during the Shoah, and their experiences of resistance, survival, and love during these dark days have stuck with me. His parents later had the chance to immigrate to the United States, and they settled in Ponca City, where they ran a small business and rebuilt their lives. But they did more than just survive, because they also taught Michael, who was born here in Oklahoma. Their experiences in Europe were in many ways similar to the experiences of the African Americans in segregated Oklahoma in the 1950s, where Michael grew up. Stories like these give me, and many others, a great deal of hope for our future. Mennonites, by their history, are experts in nonviolent resistance. This makes Mennonite congregations perfectly placed to use your voice to amplify these helping stories. I hope these thoughts might inspire you all a little, and I hope we continue this conversation not just for today, we are here, but for the future and the future's future. I'm now going to hand it off to my father to continue the discussion part of our discussion.
Thank you so much.
jump into discussion, I'll mention this resources page. We just started putting that together. So there's a little bit on there now, but we will have a lot more in the coming days and weeks. And our hope is that it might get shared a little bit broader in the broader Mennonite world, because there's some really important stuff. And we also specifically have a lot about the Mennonite piece of this and history and whatnot. So anyway, I think let's go ahead and move into some conversation.